everybody, this is Deb from Garden Devotions, and today I'm going to talk to you about wire. Why are we doing this? Well, I'm doing this because a year ago I got into wire wrapping, and I found out that it's something I can do even if I'm sitting in bed and I don't feel very good. I can still do wire wrapping, and I can't do it for long periods of time because it does require some concentration, but I can do it for a little bit and I can make a few things. So we're going to talk about wire, and this is just a basic information video, and then my next video, I'm going to show you how you can make a pendant out of wire, just wire, okay? And then after I get this one done, then I'm going to do a second tutorial on how to do one with beads. So we're starting out with just the wire first of all, and then we'll get to the one with the beads. And as you can see, this is the same basic pattern. I just did it. It has beads on it. The different colored beads makes a difference. If you make it a little longer, you end up with a bracelet. If you make the pendants smaller, you can make them into earrings, matching set. So I just wanted to show you some things you can do. You know, these pendants are one of the things you can do with wire, and you can do with different patterns. You can do bracelets of different kinds, and like this has a stiffer wire than these, so it gives a different look to it. How you wrap it can make a difference too. And there's just lots of things you can do with wire. If you don't even have this one I used a bead in, but you don't even have to use beads. You can just do plain wire. And that's what I'm going to do in the next video. I'm going to show how to make this wire pendant. Totally out of wire. That's all there is to it. And it can be done fairly inexpensively, and they look nice, and then you just can put them on whatever chain you choose, and it's pretty easy to do. You can do this. I can do this. You can do this, right? All right, but we're going to start just a quick informational session on wire, because you got to know a little bit about wire before you get into wire wrapping. First of all wire, the jewelry type wire, this is different than like wire that they have for machinery and things like that. It has a different consistency. This is called dead soft, which makes it easier to manipulate. If you have wire for the machinery, it's going to be harder wire, so it doesn't bend as easily necessarily. And you probably aren't going to want to wear that anyway. However, I know people that have made things out of it. So the first thing is there's different ways, and there's different companies, of course, for getting wire. The two that I've experienced is I went into Joann Fabrics. This is how I got started. And I purchased some wire. It was actually just a little pack of wire rolled up. And that's how I started out. The problem with it was I didn't know this at the time. They had a wire that was holding it together. When I took that wire off, it like exploded, and I could never get it back the same again, ever. And so I had all this wire everywhere, and I happened to have a cat that loves to play with the wire. So I was panic stricken that she was going to get some of it and chew it off and swallow it and then perforate something inside, and I was going to have vet bills. Oh, it just was, I had nightmares about it sometimes. So I'm always really careful where the extra wire goes when I cut it and everything, because I don't want her to get it. And when I'm wire wrapping in bed, sometimes she gets after me because this flips around and she thinks it's something to play with. But anyway, first of all, we have to talk about wire. There are different brands of wire. This one, as I said, is the one I started with, and it's okay to start with. But it's this was made with it, and if you can't, I don't know if the camera is really going to show it, but it's like coming off. I mean, it is definitely not all one tone anymore. And I've only been wearing this for off and on for about 6 months. So I'm really hesitant to recommend this, although it's really good to start out with. You can actually get The the ones that I had that I started out with were about $4, $3, $3.99 I think for one, and you can do several projects with one. So if you're just starting out, you can do that definitely. But if you want something that's going to endure for quite a while, I strongly recommend Parawire. Now, Parawire comes on these nifty little spools, and it actually has a little plastic thing you can stick on there if you want to, but I'm afraid it's going to kink my wire, so, and it's been behaving itself very nicely. So I just keep it out of reach of the cat. But the Parawire is coated, so it's not going to, if you have allergies to different metals, I think it's non-allergenic. It's non-tarnish, it says, or hypoallergenic, I guess is the term. So, you know, but I have a friend who has allergies, and this has not been a problem for her. So, when you get them, this is actually silver plated, and I think it's copper wire, but it's silver plated copper wire. And the color that it's plated, it's gold. Which makes no sense to me that it's silver-plated gold, but that's what it is. And when you get this wire, it's called dead soft, which means it's pretty easy to manipulate. But as you work with it, you can work harden it, and that means that you're going to make it a little harder by when you hammer it. You know, you can get a little timber. You can get a little hammer and anvil. And you can hammer it, and when you hammer it, it's going to work harden it a little bit. Or if you work with it, or if you kind of run your finger over it a lot like this, it will also work harden it a little bit as well. But that's a good way of getting it straight. And of course, it's not straight, but it'll straighten out as we go. And when we do our project in the next video, you'll see it's not too bad. Anyway, wire is described by gauges. Okay, you not only have color to deal with, but you have gauges. And the smaller the number, the bigger the wire. This is an 18 gauge. This is a 16 gauge. Now, the 16 gauge is the silver on top, and the 18 gauge is the gold on the bottom. See, the silver, the 16 gauge is bigger than the 18 gauge. So the bigger the number, the smaller the gauge. That's an important thing to know when you're dealing with wire. 18 gauge is a decent wire for base wires. When we weave, we have to have base wires, and then we have a weaving wire. The base wire, 18 gauge, is an okay for a base wire, but if you're new to wire weaving, I recommend you start with 20 gauge, because this is a little harder to manipulate. It kind of is a little cantankerous. 20 gauge, on the other hand, is going to give you a little easier pull. Here's the difference, if you can see it. This is the 20 gauge, this is the 18 gauge. So this is a little thinner than this one. And then from the 20 gauge, I skip down to the 26 gauge, because the 26 gauge is what I use. And you can see an obvious difference here. The 20 gauge and the 26. The 26 is what you use to weave with. Now, some people use 24, and that's fine. There's also a 22 gauge, and the 22 gauge is not bad to work with either, but you just kind of get to know it. But my recommendations, if you're just starting out, I recommend that you start with the 20 gauge for your base wires, and then the 26 gauge for your weaving wire. Let's see if I can get them all up here in a row so you can see. I'm not sure how well it'll come out with the camera, but here they are. This is 18, this is this is 16, this is 18, this is 20, and this is your 26 weaving wire. So you can see they really do have a difference. And that's probably the hardest thing to figure out as a new person. It's like, oh my gosh, they've got all these different gauges. What in the world? Yeah, start with 20 gauge for your base wires and 26 gauge for your weaving wire. Again, you can do differently, and some people, like I've seen tutorials where they want 24 gauge weaving wire. Well, that's fine. It's not going to be much different than this. 26 and 24 gauge are great weaving wires. Either one, it's fine. Now this one is very fine. In fact, I'm not sure if you can, you should be able to see it. You may not be able to see the copper one though. But yeah, this one is 34 gauge. As you can see, it's very delicate. I got this because I wanted to see what would happen if I crocheted with it. And I have little steel hooks because I like working with thread, crochet thread. So I used one of the small hooks, and this is how it came out crocheted. It's too expensive to get to really crochet anything worthwhile unless you want to invest a lot of money in it, because this costs the same as one of these and one of these and one of these and one of these. You know, these are approximately $8 a piece, and this was about $8. Of course, if you go to Joann Fabrics, you can usually get a half off coupon or 60% off. So that's what I recommend if you're starting out. I'm going to mention probably Joann Fabrics because that's where I get my stuff, just because it's the only craft store we have in town. I live in a small town. The closest craft stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby are about 45 miles away. So anyway, so the first thing you have to do is you need to decide what gauge. And like I said, I recommend for the one I'm going to be doing, in fact for both tutorials, for the one with the beads and the one with just the wire, I'm going to have 20 gauge weaving wires or base wires and 26 gauge, well I got, yeah, 26 gauge weaving wire. That's what I'm going to use. So that's what I recommend you start with. Again, it's not bad if you get an 18 gauge or a 22 gauge, but they do make it a little harder. 22 is really hard to have as base wires. You can do it, and you can also use it as a weaving wire, but it's not very flexible for weaving wire, and it's a little too flexible for base wires, in my opinion. But anyway, in order to start with this, you're going to need some tools. The first tool is you're going to need a wire cutter. You got to be able to cut it off of here, right? So you've got to have a wire cutter. You're going to need to have some pliers. Now these are bent nose pliers. I really like the bent nose because they help me. I can pick things up with them. And actually these are my favorite. I have bent nose, and then I just have a regular flat nose that I use when I do my chainmail. And yeah, this one goes in this hand because I can put the ring in there like this. And when you close something, obviously I don't have my other pliers handy. When you open and close rings, you have to do it like this. Okay, you do it sideways so you don't distort the shape. So anyway, but yeah, those are my chainmail in this hand. But they're also very good. Sometimes you have little pieces of wire and you've got to pull them, and you need some pliers. And again, I like these because you can get down in a little bit better than some others. Okay. Also, yes, you can. I thought, oh, well, I have some needle nose pliers that I use around the house. I could use those, right? No, don't use those. These are smooth on the inside, and the needle nose pliers probably have ridges, so you can grip things better, which is what you want to do with needle nose pliers. But with these, you don't want to be gripping it because you'll scratch your wire or you'll leave marks on it. So you don't want to do that. These are probably optional if you can only afford 3 pairs. And these 3, each one was about $8. But again, I get these at Joann's, and usually I have coupons, so I get like half off. So most things I get half off. They do have kits that have maybe these 3 together. This is probably optional, but I really like it. It's kind of important to me so I don't scratch things. And by the way, the wire I got from Joann's did scratch easier than the Parawire. The Parawire doesn't seem to scratch. The nylon jaw pliers are really good for doing this, or if you get something in place and you need it tweaked a little, you can tweak it with these without fearing that you're going to scratch something. So that's really why I do these. You know, you can kind of scrunch down your design a little. It's kind of nice to be able to do that. And so scrunch it down, and the nylon jaw pliers aren't going to scratch it when you do that. So very important. I think they're kind of necessary, but not as necessary as these three. These three have to be, I'm sorry, I think I forgot to mention this one. You got to have this one, because see, this is what you're going to use to make your spirals. And spirals are very important. It works kind of like a mandrel, where it helps you train the wire to go around in a circle. And that's how you're going to do things like this, and get them blurry, and get them so they're round. You're going to want to do that. So you're going to need this to do those, and you're going to need it for the spirals. So those are two important things it's going to be necessary for. All right. So that you can get started with just this right here. You have the pliers, you have the wire, and you can go. Now I do want to mention one more thing about the wire, because it is very confusing. When you go to ParaWire or website, I had no idea there was that much wire in the world. There are so many different kinds of wires. There's so many colors. The colors obviously are up to you, what you want to use. But they also have another type of wire that's called aluminum. And I wanted to show you some aluminum wire. Now, this on the spool, remember, is 16 gauge. And I believe, I can't remember exactly, but I believe the aluminum wire is 12 gauge. Now, you would think, wow, if each time you get, you know, the smaller numbers and it gets harder to bend, that's the point. I mean, this is the one on the spool, this is kind of tough to bend. This is why I wouldn't recommend you start with it. But, you know, it's just like, you're going to have to put some major pressure on it to get it to bend and to do what you want. This, on the other hand, the aluminum, bends so easy, but this really is not very good for jewelry. And part of the reason is because it bends so stinking easy. You don't want to make something and then have it distort every time you wear it. Not to mention this. By the way, the reason this distorts, it gets caught on stuff all the time. And the reason it does is because I use 20 gauge instead of 18 gauge. If I'd used 18 gauge, it would hold up a lot better. And that was, again, one reason it's kind of a test piece, if you want to say it that way. All right, so what can you do with this, with the aluminum? Well, you can do things like this. I don't recommend it for jewelry, but hey, a dragonfly is always nice, right? And it allows you to be able to wrap it around like this. You know, if I would have tried to do that with this 16 gauge, there's no way my finger would be able to wrap that around. It just couldn't. And that's 16 gauge. So, but this works really great. And by the way, I got 6 foot of this aluminum wire at Dollar Tree for $1. So it was kind of fun to play with. I made a lot of dragon flies. Yeah, dragon eyes and dragonflies, right? So yeah, you can make these. There is a tutorial guy does. He's Hispanic, and Luis something, can't remember. I'll probably put a link down below. But he makes dragonflies, and I do have some that have feet on them, but the feet get all tangled up and stuff, and so it's easier to deal with the ones that aren't. And he also does like scorpions and things like that. So some very talented wire artists out there. All right, so that's what you need to get started. That's where we're at. That is what we're going to be doing. The next video is going to show you how to do these pendants. Now they're all the same pattern. It's just that I use different color wire for each one. And really, every piece you do is a little unique, so nothing is exactly the same. That's part of it being handmade, right? So it's never going to be exactly the same. Whether you make them teardrop shape or you make them round, I made them round so they would fit with my dragon eyes. So I just needed something to put my dragon eyes in. That's why I got started with it. So yeah, that's why I started. But you can make them more teardrop shape. You can do different things with the tops. If you look on this top, it doesn't have any spirals. It has one little spiral in the back. That's all it has. And instead it has kind of a crisscross pattern up there at the top. And then on this one, instead of the crisscross pattern, we have the spirals instead that help us do something. It kind of stabilizes. We're stabilizing it, and we're also tying up those loose ends, as it were. And you'll find out more about spirals. Now, in the next video, what we're going to learn how to do is we're going to learn how to do one of these pendants. Right here, I'm going to show you how to weave it. It's really not hard. It's just very repetitious. Once you learn the pattern, you just do the same pattern all the way around until you get to here. At the end of the second video, it's going to look something like this. Now, this has actually 5 weaving wire or 5 base wires, but you'll only have 3. But still, it's going to be at this point. I'm going to stop at the end of this point because the video is just they'll be too long for me to upload. And then the third video is where I'm going to take you from this point to where we have it all finished and we have the top all done, so it's ready to put a jump ring in there, and then you can put whatever kind of necklace you want on it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and I hope that you'll find it very interesting. Wire, it's just amazing to me what all you can do with it. Look at this. I coiled a wire around a separate wire, and then I took the wire that I coiled and I coiled around this wire, and it makes a whole different little thing. You know, I've got rings that I made. I've got a little flower that I'm working on. So there are lots of things you can do with wire, and just slight changes, knowing one pattern and making slight changes, making changes to the weave or making changes, adding a bead or something along those lines can make the pendant look different. So you can see that you've got such a variety here to work with when it comes to wire. It is not as simple as it might seem, but it is simple. It's really not hard to do once you learn it. It's just a pattern repetition. And once you do the pattern repetition, you can make bracelets. You can make necklaces even if you want to. You can make lots of things, all depending on how patient you are or what you want to do. And so that's what I'm going to be working with right now, and I thought I would share it with you guys. And since I'm a teacher and I love to teach, I am going, like I said, I'm going to do a tutorial on it to show you how I made that particular pendant, and you can join me and you can make the pendant yourself. So you'll need these pliers, you'll need some wire, and then these. It will make this. Okay? See you in the next video. Bye-bye.